Namaskar, pranam to everyone here and especially to the respected Swamiji and Swamini here and all the members of the audience who are attentively still sitting here. I salute you for being here for so long. And it's an absolute privilege for me to be present here at the 75th year celebration of Chinmaya Mission. Absolute honor because it feels surreal to me that I'm in the birthplace of Adi Shankara, and the past 2 days I've been soaking in the vibrations of the Guru Shishya Parampara, something that I've been writing about for years and years about the educational heritage of India, which has inspired me so much. And now I'm seeing in action what a Guru Shishya Parampara can accomplish. How all of you are so motivated, carrying forward the work of the Gurus. So many books that have been written, so many talks, so many lectures, so many courses, and so the knowledge is being passed on from generation to generation. That fills me with a lot of motivation to keep continuing my work on this, my research on this. My topic today is Dharma Sukshma, the subtle art of building a dharmic society. And now I'm feeling a little bit nervous sitting in front of all these dharmic people who would know far more about Dharma Sukshma, and I'm daring to do this because Gauri ji, Sunita ji think I'm capable of talking about this subject, so I'm here. Now, Dharma is something that everybody seems to know what Dharma is. If you, all of us who are in this space talking about Dharma, so most people would say they know what Dharma means, but I think they would say it means duty, it means righteousness, it means the cosmic order, or it means the moral law that sustains society, right? Reams have been written about it, politicians talk about it. People even have t-shirts which says Dharmo Rakshati Rakshitaha. So that is how commonly this word Dharma is used. But I think what is less understood is Dharma Sukshma, the Sukshma of the part of Dharma. And because Dharma is never like a straight road with visible boundaries that you can walk on and I'm walking the path of Dharma. Typically, Dharma would be like a forest on a mountain, and you have to navigate your way across, and despite whatever books you might have read, you still are not very sure about what is Dharma, whether it is right or wrong, that what you are doing. So that is how it is. It is the subtle, fine-grained, nuanced understanding of the right action in a specific situation, for a specific person, in a specific web of relationships, isn't it? That is what Dharma Sukshma is, and you have consequences. Anything that you do has consequences, which is what makes it so challenging. Pardon me for keeping on looking at my notes. Since I didn't get a Vedic education, my memory is only a fraction of what it should be, so I have to refer to my notes. So Dharma Sukshma requires a different kind of moral sensitivity, which is cultivated through reflection, experience, the company of wise people, and what Swami Chinmayananda would say, the purification of the mind. All these factors are needed in order to know what Dharma Sukshma is. Now, Mahabharata is one of the most popular texts because it is far more than the Vedas. We get a lot of ideas about what Dharma Sukshma is from the Mahabharata. It was written, compiled by Veda Vyasa, and you can see that there are so many characters in the book who are flawed, they are loving, they are ambitious, they are afraid, and then they are always put in a situation where they have to take hard decisions in very difficult circumstances, where challenging circumstances, they have to make a decision. And in Mahabharata, we find that the characters who are destroyed ultimately are often not because they are evil or because they are villains. It's more because they did not know what is Dharma Sukshma. And that is what led to their destruction. Now, one of the characters that I think really illustrates a lot about Dharma Sukshma is Bhishma. I think Bhishma is one of the most tragic characters in Mahabharata, even more than Draupadi and Karna, right? Because of that oath that he took. We all know the story that when he saw that his father Shantanu has fallen in love with a fisherwoman, And the only way that his father can marry her is if he takes this oath that he will remain lifelong celibate, and that way he will not have any claim to the throne. So that oath, when he took, it was called the Bhishma Pratigna, and it was such an extreme act of self-abnegation that the Devatas showered flowers on him for that, and he got the name Bhishma, the one who has taken the terrible vow. Now look at what happened after he took that oath, what all happened in his life, right? He is the most powerful man over there in the kingdom, and yet he sits silently when Draupadi, in that same hall in which he's sitting, she's being disrobed. And a very unfair war, unjust war took place right when he was there. It was planned in front of him and the war took place. But he thinks he's following dharma by not saying anything. He thinks silence is dharma over here. He rationalized his complicity as loyalty. He thinks it's loyal to just keep quiet and not say anything, right? And the vow that he had taken in one context was to protect his father's happiness. But what he did with that is that he made it seem like he has abdicated from all his duties. So now it's a license to not do anything, and that is why he kept quiet when all the wrongs took place in front of him, right? So he lacked the inner flexibility. To recognize that honoring the letter of that commitment was actually dishonoring, betraying everything that the commitment stood for. The commitment was to protect the throne, but it was not to allow wrongs to be done by the throne. But he didn't correct himself. So it's interesting that when Draupadi went to Bhishma and asked him, what is dharma? Are you doing the right thing here? Why was I violated? What is dharma? And he himself says, dharma is very subtle. Even the wise people are confused about what is dharma. So that is what it was. Now, dharma, the Bhishma that we see in Mahabharata, we often see the similar characters in our daily life. We see him in the committee, one of the committee members. We see him in the family, right? Someone who says, I am loyal to this. I'm loyal to this, my boss. So whatever is happening in front of me I cannot say anything about it because I have my commitment to my job, my boss. Or it could be the husband who does nothing to protect his wife when his mother is doing wrong to his wife, because he thinks that is dharma. I have to stand with my mother. Or it could be that he stands with his mother and allows the wife to be wronged, for unjust actions to be done on the wife, and the husband says nothing. All these show that they think they are doing the right thing. They are following the dharmic path, but actually they have not understood dharma. I want to give some more examples to illustrate Dharma Sukshma. And one of them is the case of Vaishno Devi. Vaishno Devi, as you know, is a very holy place, sacred shrine, and millions of people climb the mountain to have darshan of Vaishno Devi. Now, it's a very difficult path and not everybody can walk. I think it's about 14 kilometers of uphill walking. And that is why they have made horses, ponies available for people to use to climb the mountain. And what has happened now is that it was for a good intention, that the ponies were made available for those who cannot walk but want the darshan. They are very religious people, they are very devoted people, so they can get the darshan by going on a pony. Over the years, what has happened, the pony riders, the masters of the pony, they are exploiting that animal, and one animal makes about 12 trips in a day. And by the end of the day, it is so exhausted, it cannot walk at all. Still, it is being forced to walk up and down. And many times they are bleeding. They are bleeding. The saddle on their back is not fitting properly. They are exhausted. They collapse. And if they collapse midway, I have heard that the pony drivers actually push the animal from the cliff because they don't want to take it back and take it to the hospital. They just push it and it dies. So it happens a lot, and in spite of that, it's going on, right? Now, what is dharma over here? I was thinking that if you are not able to walk, if you're not able to do the yatra and get the darshan of the Devi or any deity, why are you making it in the first place, right? So here, a grandmother who stays at home, prays in her puja room, meditates on the Devi, she will get more punya than, I would say, than somebody who makes that effort. Okay, made the effort, but the process you have got this exploitation of animals happening and so many other wrongs happening. Better just work, pray in the confines of your home. That is Dharma Sukshma. It's not that the people who are going on yatra are malicious. They are doing it with good intent. But they have not done the fine thinking to see whether it is really necessary, whether they are capable of doing that. So I would say that there is a friction between a received practice, a practice that has come down to us, and the actual intent of the practice. And in that friction, we have to find out what is the correct dharma to be applied here, right? I was thinking about I met a lot of people who are today very irreligious. They are not interested in religion. They don't want to do any rituals. And I found out that they came from very religious families. Their parents were very ritualistic. They were doing a lot of things. But these children are not interested in it. They hate it. Now what has happened when I found out is they were being forced to do it by the parents. They were not being told why it has to be done, and they were just being forced to do it, and at some point they said, I'm not doing it. I don't like this. Why are you forcing me to fast? Why are you forcing me to wear these clothes? Somewhere that happened and they stopped doing it. So again, that Dharma Sukshma has not been applied. Instead of forcing somebody, you have to work with some subtlety in order to make them appreciate those rituals before making them do it, right? And I also want to give another personal example. When I was a young girl, this was an example of how I saw my mother navigating this tension of dharma. My sister was very sick. She had jaundice, and she had become so weak, lost a lot of weight, and the doctor said, you have to give her chicken soup every day. Now, my mother is a strict vegetarian. We have never cooked non-veg in the house, nor will she allow it in the house. But now the doctor is saying that my sister, she's so weak that she needs a lot of nutrients, lot of protein, so many things, and it's best that you give her chicken soup every day. You get it somehow for her. And then we were all shocked, and we said, what do we do? And in those days, we didn't have such high quality supplements. Today we have vegetarian supplements, which are quite good, and you don't need to go for chicken soup or things like that if you're a pure vegetarian. But in those days, those things were not available. And so I saw my mother reflecting on what she should be doing, and she said, okay, I will have to make chicken soup. I was shocked. I said, Amma, you can't even look at it. You can't pass by a shop with a meat shop, and you're saying you're going to make chicken soup for Sarita, my sister? And she said, I have to do it. And there I saw that she has had this conflict between her dharma as a mother and her ahimsa dharma, which she had been following all her life. And she has realized she has to follow the dharma of a mother first over that. But luckily what happened is one of our neighbors, she said, nothing doing, you don't have to do it. I will make it and I will bring it and give it to your daughter every day, so don't worry about it. And that's how for about 2 months or 3 months she took, and she was restored to her health, and everything was back to normal, back to being vegetarian. So that's another story where from my mother I learned the aspect of Dharma Sukshma, how you decide, your mind goes through that process of knowing what is priority right now, what do I need to do now, right? Swami Chinmayananda had been a journalist for so many years, and that's why he based a lot of his learning on observation, right? A very, very intelligent mind, and he has spoken a lot about dogma, superstition in the society, and how we should not be performing rituals just for the sake of performing rituals. He was not against rituals, but don't perform it mechanically without understanding why you are doing it, right? So and that is why he made it his life mission to convert Hindus to Hinduism, because Hindus don't really know what dharma is. So that was his mission. And we can see that in ancient India, there was never an attempt to make any commandments, that these are the things, 10 commandments that you have to follow and everybody has to follow. They never gave it to us like that, because they wanted people to use their own discriminative intellect, to use their own viveka to know what is right and wrong. And we know that the Bhagavad Gita also, it describes that one whose buddhi is steady and clear, only he can make the right decision about what is to be done next, right? So in the ancient educational system, Dharma Sukshma was transmitted through the Guru Shishya Parampara. And so there were so many situations that would come up. The Guru would tell so many stories, parables, paradoxes, all these things, and there will be a web of relationships through which the student would understand what is Dharma Sukshma. So when the education system was done away with, when we had, everybody has been speaking about Macaulay, and in my book also there is a whole chapter on how colonial education destroyed the indigenous education system. And so all those ways in which Dharma Sukshma could be taught, that was taken away. It went away, and we just had the regular engineering, science, and other educational systems where the aspects of Dharma and Dharma Sukshma were never transmitted. So the way the student develops a Dharma Sukshma, I think it's like a muscle, how a new muscle develops. You go through a lot of pain, you have to go through a practice again and again, and finally that muscle develops. So that is the way it develops, and if you're not given those conditions where that happens, it never develops. So when we lost that system of education which was teaching how to understand Dharma, how to navigate the world in a dharmic way, that is when Swami Chinmayananda came on the scene, and you all know about the Jnana Yagna that he did, where constant interaction with the sacred texts of India. We keep interacting with them, understanding what is in it, having debates on them, and slowly you understand something, you get closer to what it is, and the rest of it comes through practice. It's interesting that Swami Chinmayananda spent so much of his energies on Gita, because he realized that Gita is the one, if you study it thoroughly, that you will get closer to understanding what Dharma Sukshma is, right? So Krishna did not tell Arjuna straight away when he saw him depressed, when he's not able to fight the war. He knows his Kshatriya Dharma, but then he sees his uncle, his brother, his cousin, all family people, and he thinks, I don't need to fight. I think it's better I just keep my arms down, let them kill me, that's fine. It's far bigger sin for me to attack them than for me to just die over here, right? He was in that state of non-discrimination, absolute no understanding of Dharma. He was in that state. And we notice how Krishna did not just tell him, do this, do this, do that. He took him through the whole process of understanding, right? So he takes him through an understanding of the nature of the self, nature of desire, nature of knowledge, what is liberation. He does all that, and then he makes Arjuna realize himself what is the right thing to do. So get rid of all the attachments, get rid of the grief, and then make the decision. So the Bhagavad Gita has already shown us that, and that is why Swami Chinmayananda has spent so much time on making sure that this text, first of all, people learn it by heart if possible, understand it completely, keep remembering it when you are in situations in your life where, what do I do now? What is the right thing? There are two, it's not completely black and white. Both the solutions might be correct. Then what do you do? And that is when the time that you have spent with the Gita and time you have spent with the Guru, understanding what it is saying, will help you to make the decision. The interesting thing is that it is not just Arjuna in the battlefield who is facing that situation, right? We are all in that situation where if there is an accountant who has to fake the accounts of the company that he's working for, and that is again a Kurukshetra where he has to decide whether he should do it or not do it. Or you can talk of, there's situations in life like where there's a husband who has to decide whether he wants to take a lower paying job to be in the same city as his wife who has a higher paying job. But in order to stay together, should he take the decision of going for the lower paying job so that the family can be together? These are the kind of dilemmas, moral dilemmas that we keep facing. And it's not just a simple case of right or wrong. So Dharma, when we study Dharma just as it is, we think there is a right and there is a wrong. But more often than not, it's just a gray zone where both the solutions might be correct and we don't know what to do, right? And so the Gita's way was to develop the inner capacity so that you know what is the moral thing to do. So develop yourself internally so that externally you know what is to be done. So I was imagining a lot about what would a society with Dharma Sukshma look like. I'm trying to imagine, and I can see that so many societies all over, they're grappling with complex ethical dilemmas coming from technological disruptions, environmental crisis, social polarization, and even laws and policies cannot solve this problem. You cannot make a law and say that if the law is followed, everything will be fine. No. Even then you will hit a roadblock when you are following the laws and the policies. So what we require is a society with citizens who have a good ethical reasoning skill. That is very important. It has to be a society which is comfortable with moral complexity. So they should be okay with complexity. They should not be looking only for simple solutions, right? Capitalist versus socialist, you have all this traditional versus modern. It's not like that. Somewhere there is some space between the two of them, which is probably more traditional or more modern, which is probably the right thing to do in that context, right? So I was reflecting on Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. If you remember, when he came on the scene, it was a time when widow remarriage was simply not permitted, right? The right thing for a widow to do was to stay single, wear the clothes. I mean, in the northern India, they wore white clothes. I'm not sure in southern India what they were doing, but there were so many customs, shaving off the hair, eating only sattvic food, a lot of things, giving up a lot of desires, and staying like a widow the whole life, right? Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar came along and he said, this is not what it was designed for. That following dharma was not that a woman remains lonely, sad, and also a lot of illicit things were happening. Some of the women were getting into relationships. There were also illegitimate births happening, abortions happening. There were rapes happening. Also, widows were also getting raped sometimes because there's a single woman who is nobody to protect her. That also could happen. So Vidyasagar, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, what he did is he used Dharma Shastras to make the case that we are not following dharma here. A woman should be allowed to remarry. And he said that in the Vedas also it is said that it can be done. He gave the example of various other smritis. Then he argued that the dharmic thing to do is to allow the lady to remarry, and that would be good for society. Ultimately, he convinced everybody, and that came into being. Here is an example of someone who understood dharma sukshma instead of just following some kind of dharma that was being followed at that time. And another historical example of dharma sukshma was the manner in which Swami Dayanand Saraswati, how he's the founder of, I'm talking about the founder of Arya Samaj. So he, in the 19th century, it was a time when a lot of Hindus were being converted into Christianity, Islam, and they were not being allowed to come back to Hinduism. Suppose they are forcibly converted to some other religion, and later they want to come back to Hinduism, that was not allowed because you are Ashuddha, you can't come back. And this went on for a long time, and it was then Swami Dayanand Saraswati and Swami Shraddhanand who argued that this is not the way. If we continue this, then what will happen? All the people who are getting forcibly converted will increase the population of the other religion, and our way of life will totally get diminished till there will be very few people left. This is not making sense. And so he brought back the Shuddhi ceremony. There was actually a Shuddhi ceremony that was there in some texts, in some Shastras. He revived it. He revived the Shuddhi ceremony, and he said, the Hindus who have been converted to other religions, if they want to come back, we will do the Shuddhi ceremony and we'll bring them back into the religion. So he fought for it. He had to speak to many people. He was, in fact, Swami Shraddhanand was also killed. He was, I think, assassinated. But ultimately, this has become quite acceptable now, right? So to understand in all these cases what is to be done, it is the Antakarana that has to be developed, which is what Swami Chinmayananda kept saying day and night. We have this mental instrument, the mind. Purify it, fine-tune it, so that the signal of dharma comes to you, you catch it properly, and you do the right thing. So now that Chinmaya Mission is completing 75 years, there is a lot to celebrate. The Bal Vihars, the Yuva Kendras, and I living in the US have seen what Chinmaya Mission is doing. So many friends, when we first went to the US, they said every Sunday we go to Chinmaya Mission. Our children are learning about Dharma over there. I have seen all that happening. I'm very happy with what has been achieved. But, when Guruji attained Mahasamadhi, I think 1993, that was way before the storm that came and hit us, the social media storm, which came, I think, about 15, 20 years after Gurudev attains Mahasamadhi. And AI was still not, we didn't know what AI can do at that time. 1993, we couldn't even imagine that a day will come like what we are experiencing today, right? Now we have crash landed into this age of unprecedented visibility. So now we have the tools to be visible at all times. We are eating, drinking, we can transmit it. You know, where holidays we are going, what clothes we are wearing, what husband said to me, what wife said to me, what daughter said to me. We can just make every part of our life visible day and night. And this has become such a big problem today that now it has become very performative. Elaborate systems have been created now. There's a platform where everything is performative. Outrage, you're going to be outraged over something and you say, this is bad, we must condemn it. Now, whoever doesn't condemn it is now labeled as not being with us, but on the other side. So this kind of madness that has come now, I really wish Swamiji was here with us, Gurudev, to tell us how to navigate this. The kind of hatred that we are seeing on social media, and it's also in real life, the same hatred. And that's why you are seeing all this political, the polarization. Earlier, people from different parties could be friends. Now, I myself saw it when 2014, I'm sure, is a year where a lot of people lost their friends. They got new enemies if you are on this side or that side. So many. And this is going on. And now with AI, we are now having this era where you can get the answer to everything. You put the question, you get one tailored answer. You can use that in your essay, you can use it in your speech, you can just talk whatever is there and you don't use your mind at all. So technology is blurring the boundaries that once existed. And so today's generation will find it very hard to know what is right or what is wrong, right? So if there is a breakup with a boyfriend, go to AI and ask, what should I do? AI will tell you something, go and do it. Where there is no understanding, even sometimes the parents don't know what to tell them, right? And I have to say that even sometimes I am guilty of this in certain situations, maybe even I will use AI. But this is because we have lost that parampara where we have a guru-like figure with us whom we can keep talking to. Those of you who are already in the system of, in the Chinmaya mission, you're connected with gurus, you have Swaminis like you here, we can ask you. But otherwise, most of us are alone and we don't know what to do, right? It's a very difficult time. And I think the most meaningful tribute that we can offer to Swami Chinmayananda is to be worthy of all that he gave to us. And we have to now use our own mind to navigate the problem we have today. I don't have the solution, but this technological age that has come is something beyond what we can imagine. It is going to lead to, we know what it's going to lead to. Many jobs are going to go. AI can literally do everything. It can write essays, it can do jobs that people used to have a job, stable job. And we don't know now how many people will lose their jobs in the coming years. So it is going to be a total bloodbath according to many people. There have been predictions that almost 60-70% of jobs will go. So this is the time when we have to really, really think of Dharma Sukshma. All that is in the books over there, all those we have heard in the lectures, how do we use that to make us navigate these difficult times? We have the Gita, of course, we have all of that, but then the situation today we have is totally different. So we have to think of how to solve real world problems. What I tell people when they talk about AI is that AI, what will happen when the jobs go away? What do we do? Then I tell them that real world problems, focus on them and think of solving them. That is the only way you will still be valuable in society. So think of ways to keep being valuable to society by solving problems. And for that, I think that is the way to go forward. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about Dharma Sukshma. I hope I got some thoughts in your head today to think further. Thank you.